Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the COVID series of sales webinars offered here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. My name is Deva Rangarajan. I am the host of the show. But today, again, we have a returning guest, Dr. Murali Mantrala, who is going to share with us some of his insights from his vast experience of dealing with organizations and how they've looked at managing the sales force. Dr. Mantrala was actually a guest in our previous podcast where he had shared with us some of his insights about how the B2B buying process is changing and consequently what impact it has on the sales organization. And one of the things which he touched upon, which was very, very interesting, was the fact that the field sales force now need to realize that it is not going to be business as usual. Yes, it was already happening in the last 4 to 5 years, if not more, but things are going to accelerate maybe a lot more, or things are going to change. It's not going to be the same as usual before. So, which means that how would a sales organization manage these people, which is extremely critical, how to keep them motivated, because a motivated sales force is more likely to go out there and be more productive. So with that in mind, Dr. Mantrala mentioned that he's doing some research on how incentives can be structured to actually get the salespeople to go out there and be productive. So he's going to share with us some of his insights on why incentive plans are going to be critical if we're going to be expecting newer things from our field sales force. Dr. Mantrala, again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Okay, so for those who have looked at sales management surveys and so on, and or textbooks or classes, I think if you did any survey on sales compensation, you would know that historically the predominant form of sales compensation was some kind of combination of fixed pay and variable pay, or what they call salary plus incentive.
Yeah.
And inevitably, the incentive in most cases was tied to sales metrics or output metrics, as we call them.
Yeah.
And historically, that has made sense even to economists and theoreticians, because normally, if you could, you would pay somebody for their effort, how much time they spent in selling or how many calls they made. But some of the most brilliant economists over the last decade have a couple of decades have talked about how observing effort is difficult in the case of things like outside salespeople. And so you have to almost necessarily pay them not according to their effort, which you can't observe because they're not operating in front of you, but you have to pay them according to some metric which you can observe, such as their sales output or their sales performance relative to a quota that you might have set in the beginning of the year. And in fact, the so-called salary plus sales quota bonus plans are the most prevalent type of sales incentive. And so the economists I'm referring to are known as agency theorists or principal agent people, and a couple of them recently won the Nobel Prize. So that entire history is very important in the academic literature. But it was all centered on one basic idea that you couldn't observe people's inputs. If you could observe their inputs, then it's easiest just to pay them according to how much time you want them to work. So that was the case, but what is really happening with the trend towards inside selling, which we talked about in the other interview and in general, just to recap, many B2B buyers and organizations are preferring to deal with suppliers and their sales forces who at their according to their time frame and according to their preference. And a lot of this turns into calls being made into the organization, the supplier organization, asking for advice or uh, getting some negotiation started. So there is this corresponding trend for building up an inside sales force companies. And the question is, how do you compensate inside salespeople? That's basically what the research question that I was dealing with. And the beauty of this whole thing is that unlike the outside salespeople, you can actually observe what the inside salespeople are doing.
Indeed.
And which means that you can actually seriously, without too much cost, try to think creatively about what we call activity-based incentive as opposed to output-based. Now, historically, if you look in any textbook or talk to sales managers, all sales managers recognize that sales don't just happen, they happen because of a series of activities or inputs at different stages put in by the reps. And uh, sometimes they would have a token bonus or some kind of incentive tied to, okay, how many new customer calls did you do? Or how many new quotations did you put out there? Or how many emails did you answer? Or how many proposals did you send? These were all so-called activities which everyone knew were precursors or leading indicators, as they say, of sales, which you have to put in order to get the sale. But because many of these people were outside, the monitoring was difficult and costly, and the economist's explanation was that that's why you would use output-based plans, as was the case in the past. But now that you have inside salespeople, you can actually pay more closer attention to the so-called leading indicators or precursor activities. Because while outside outcome-based sales were convenient, they were always a bit problematic for risk-averse salespeople, because if you tie their pay to output, and the output is always subject to some uncertainty, and despite their best effort, if an order doesn't come through, they don't get paid. And that was always the cost of having such incentives, especially for people who have a high risk attitude or are risk averse. So in the case of input-based, the advantage is that everything that you might pay them on is controllable by the rep, because they can actually, you tell them to make so many proposals, they can actually do that. And if you're going to pay them independent of whether they actually got any sale because of their activity, you remove that problem that used to be present with the output-based plans. But as I said, until recently, nobody really gave much attention to these input-based plans. But now I think the trend is changing, and more it is becoming feasible to do these activity-based incentives. But interestingly, so far, there are no real systematic guidelines for how do you set these activity-based. There are a couple of basic questions. What are the activities you should reward people on? And if you think about it, they should logically be those which are closely related or predict future sales. And the second thing is, how should you tie the bonus or whatever to those activities? And interestingly, while it's become feasible to do this now that people are inside, it's actually also very important from a buyer viewpoint, because more and more B2B buyers are concerned more about the quality of the calls with the reps than the quantity, because they don't need quantity because they get all the information already. But when they do talk to a rep, they want it to be a very effective rep. And so there is a premium now being placed on selling effectiveness, much more than selling effort. And the traditional way of compensating salespeople was really rewarding them for putting in more effort towards something or goal or the other. And tacitly, the models would assume the effectiveness was fixed or
Right.
constant. And all that was being changed with commissions and all was how much effort you put in different goals.
Right.
But in reality, it is effectiveness is also a driver of the
Indeed.
sales outcome.
Hmm.
And that is becoming crucial for buyers. They want more effective calls.
Hmm.
But traditional models have assumed effectiveness is fixed.
Hmm.
So there was no model yet about how do you pay somebody to improve their effectiveness.
Yeah.
And the logical way to do that is to pay them for the activities which contribute to effectiveness,
Yeah.
which is now becoming feasible because of the inside
It is.
approach, which is why this has opened up, in my mind, a new avenue for sales incentive research, which is rather than being the stepchild of incentive planning, it should now become a central feature of incentive planning. How do you set up the right activity-based incentives, which are well integrated with your sales incentives,
Indeed.
in a way that increases or induces reps to be more effective
Yeah. Indeed.
when they do call on a customer?
Indeed.
And so there's a whole, if you think about it, there's so many questions surrounding what I just said.
Absolutely.
We are only attacking one piece, which is if I do manage to come up with the correct incentive plans with the input or activity, what should be the amount of money or
Yeah.
commission I should tie to the activity versus the actual sales?
Indeed.
So,
Indeed.
there are lots of questions, but we are looking at that issue, which is what
Indeed.
should be the ratio
Indeed.
of activity-based to sales-based
I
commission.
I think it's very, very interesting because the idea of being able to monitor inside sales efforts is much more now. But don't you also think that right now that with more and more of these tracking systems that you have, that you can even track the activities of your external sales force, and given
Sure.
the fact that a lot of the external sales force's job right now, part of it at least could be taken over by newer roles like inside sales doing a part of what salespeople used to do in the past. Similarly, on the other end,
Absolutely.
you see, so which means that I think that what you say applies even to external sales because
Yeah, I should have said that this new trend towards inside sales provided the catalyst or the
indeed, indeed,
trigger to refocus on this.
indeed,
But as you said, in fact, effectiveness is an important element for even outside salespeople.
absolutely.
And so
I think
the
indeed,
same model could be
indeed,
developed to
indeed,
come up
indeed,
with a so-called what we call a multi-dimensional scheme, which can
absolutely,
reward people for both activity and
indeed.
outcome.
Because the reason why I'm asking this question, and I think that is something which is going to become relevant more in the future, there is this increasing trend that I'm hearing that essentially in the past, if you take a normal sales process, the prospecting and the initial qualification might be taken over by inside sales. They could even close a deal, but that is typically what we see. We also see the external sales person doing the part, but we now have another role called customer success, which comes in post sales, is not to be mistaken with account management because these people proactively work with the customer and kind of articulate the value that was promised and saying this is what we've delivered. And then when it's time for you to sign up an extension of the contract, then the account manager comes in.
Yeah.
So
So now you're talking about extending the sales
exactly.
cycle. This is not just getting a immediate sale, but how do you
Well, exactly,
evolve the
recurring
relationship?
sales, and so what we're seeing right now, and I think that is something that would be very interesting moving forward, is that yes, we have incentives, but what if the inside sales is linked, has to do a handover of that to the external sales to close the deal, and then you have the
Right.
customer success coming in. Essentially, now we see firms beginning to use the concept of pods, the idea of pods being multiple salespeople involved with the same kind of customer. And then, of course, then again, when you have this, you have the multi-dimensional aspect of Do I reward them for effort as against effectiveness? Effort
Yeah,
instead of
interesting question.
in
Uh,
and
what
what are your thoughts? Yeah,
I was describing earlier was the case of how do you compensate or incentivize a pure
yeah,
inside salesperson or a pure outside salesperson. But now you're talking about a second level issue, which is how do you also coordinate their efforts
indeed,
and or their activities.
indeed,
My intuition tells me that for the coordination part, you probably still have to rely on outputs because
absolutely,
those two guys may not be able to see each other's
indeed,
effort. You know,
absolutely, and
so
that's the whole
so
point.
you might have a hybrid compensation scheme, but part of it rewards the inside guy for activities,
Mm.
but part of it rewards and the outside guy for his activities, and part of it rewards them for their joint sales outcome.
It could be given joint activities, including how many times did they get together. Did they do joint presentations? Could also be something which
As I
is
said, it's a whole new world out there.
absolutely,
But
but
all of this is important because there's only so much you can do with prior recruiting and training. But once they're in place, you want these folks to constantly improve their effectiveness
yeah,
as well as their effort. And you need to also reassure them that they will be compensated adequately for their efforts,
yeah,
even if they don't materialize in sales.
indeed.
So I feel, especially in a situation where the customers may, you are talking about COVID or post-COVID, where in face-to-face interactions in the field are going to be much less. Activities are
Indeed,
more observable
indeed,
and should play a role because certainly without the activities, you wouldn't get the outcome.
absolutely. And I think I love this because if you take a look at popular, apart from textbooks, if you take a look at popular practitioner books, like there's a book called Cracking the Sales Management Code. And my
Right.
Bible for a practitioner slash book would be a book called Building a Winning Sales Force by Zoltners and Sinha from ZS Associates. And Sally Lorimer, I should be mentioning the third person there as well. And one of the things that I've always used, and please
I
tell me,
just add here that for the benefit of your viewers, that both Professor Zolters and Sinha are my own advisors.
oh
So
wow, so oh,
I would recommend their books anytime.
indeed, and as a matter of fact, that's what I tell everybody. If you want an easy read, then
Yeah.
there are many books out there that are 240 pages. You want to make an informed choice, take the time to read the other book. And because one of the reasons that I took away from that, which is very insightful, was the idea of activities being much more effective to actually see whether you actually win the sale or not, because there are too many points beyond the control of a salesperson. And I personally think that was always the case, but post COVID or during COVID, that's even more the case because you really do not know whether the customer is going to be buying or not, what status the customer is in, what is your competition going to be doing to get that business. So the only thing is either you have the choice of keeping your salespeople unhappy by saying that, you know what, you didn't hit the outcome, but you are not going to reward them for all the effort that they put into it. So it's not all or nothing. And I think
No,
now more than
that's
ever, indeed,
traditionally that activity part was minuscule compared to the bulk of the compensation. My guess is that ratio should increase.
absolutely. And because the fact is that now when I talk, and please tell me your thoughts on this, Dr. Mantrala, is that when I talk to companies about this and I tell them the following is forget the COVID. The one thing that has happened because of COVID is that you're telling your salespeople not to be pushy to your customers, be respectful of what situation the customer is in, and consequently make sure that you are helping the customer along the process, which is what I would say is a service activity towards the customer.
But
And
I want to, if I may,
yeah,
emphasize that the selection of the activity metrics has to be done very judiciously.
yeah,
It's not like any old activity that they do.
yeah,
should be rewarded. They have to do activities which actually theoretically or otherwise
Right.
they do in fact have a bearing on
On the sale.
the evolution of the sale.
Absolutely.
So, like demonstrations in my mind are a
Uh,
perfect activity to reward,
Indeed.
because if you give a good demo, there's a higher probability that you'll get a sale, and but and you would have to do the same amount of intellectual thinking in giving
Absolutely.
a good demo,
Uh,
but at least you are rewarded for doing that. Uh,
Absolutely.
so,
Indeed.
so the choice of the KPIs is going to be another research question. Which are
Absolutely.
the right measures in different situations,
And
which have uh, a direct
uh,
path to sales.
Indeed. But I also want to add, because one of the things which I also take away again from the book is that if you're there in situations where the sales cycle by itself is long, and I really think that the COVID is artificially making things longer. Why do I say this? Is that if you try and take a look at the research by Gartner that said that after the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, the sales process just became longer because there were more and more people involved in the customer's decision making unit. And
Right.
consequently, the more number of people automatically meant a longer time to make a decision. So your traditional sales cycles have become longer. So you have to service the customers more. So not only has it become
Yeah.
longer, your
Which
sales has become uncertain. So
which actually another aspect to look at in future research or is team selling, because
yeah,
the more your buying centers or your buyers become larger, you will need correspondingly a bigger sales team
absolutely. To deal with this, right?
to coordinate, to meet these folks or interact with them at
Indeed.
different levels, and compensating a sales team is another challenge.
Because I think that the closest thing I can think of was a pod example, because that is actually a pure sales team. And the only thing I usually tell companies is that there is a reason why almost all sales books written give examples of product companies, not pure B2B professional service firms, because the sale can occur at any point in time. There's a significant amount of servicing the customers involved, which is purely activity based. And the only thing you have to go by is the word of the salespeople, or hopefully, if you're lucky, good quality visit reports. And from that perspective, if you think about the current situation, the closest you can draw parallels to is how do professional service firms with long sales cycle times reward their salespeople based on activities. And again, those activities should be good lead indicators. And I think
Yeah,
the COVID is a classical example where almost every sales professional I've talked to, not the academic side, because we're still looking into it from the professional side, is that they said we're going to relax our KPIs for this particular time period because we know that it's not being fair. We just want
right.
our salespeople to keep the
But
customer.
but I think they are talking about sales outcome based KPIs, because you certainly still want to put in the
Yeah,
cultivation of the accounts.
indeed.
It's especially during this downtime, you want to
Absolutely. See
keep
what
up
you're doing.
those
Indeed.
proposals and
Keep them going. Absolutely.
demonstrations.
Indeed. And that's where it's becoming interesting, because it could become a double-edged sword. Because right now, if you say you want to put in more proposals and you're not sure of the outcome, the problem is that a salesperson is just going to put in more number of proposals.
Yeah, yeah,
Even,
which is why there should be a
indeed.
judicial.
Absolutely. Indeed. And I think that is, again, so very, very, again, as usual, Dr. Mantrala, that's all the time we have for, but it's very, very interesting that these kind of things, which is what you're looking at. And for the audience, if any one of you are interested and you listen to this, you want to help Dr. Mantrala in his research, please reach out to me or to him, and they'll be more than glad to give you their insights in exchange for access to data. So, Dr. Mantrala, thank you again for a very enlightening talk as well.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
All right.